Okay, so having a look at the examples we've got here, the thumbnail sketches are probably the first thing we look at. As the name implies, they're meant to be about the size of your thumb. And the idea is just to do a really rough sketch, as I've outlined, with each of your ideas, linking this to your investigation, of course. So if you've been looking at carcass frames like I've got here for holding up a top, either as a bench, as a coffee table, as a tabletop, as a vase holding table kind of idea, you really want to be looking at the interaction of the frames. That's what I focused on with my thumbnail sketches, because the tabletop I kind of want to make plain and simple, so I don't need to make too much of a fuss over that. In that regard, I've now focused more on these individual designs. So not to labour the point, but basically come up with different iterations, detailing what makes them different from each other, so that you can kind of, hopefully this gives you a good idea of the different things you could do. Could you make it taller, wider, shorter? Could you make it with round material rather than square material? What about if you try and make it rectangular? What about if you try and put the carcass at the bottom, the framing at the bottom rather than at the top where the tabletop attaches? What are the effects there? So having a good look at your thumbnail sketches to kind of decide that. So focusing from there, we go to our half-page sketches. And so you can see here how I've detailed two kind of major divergent ideas. One that's basically a coffee table with mortise and tenon joints between the rails and the legs, with a tabletop going on top of that. I've given it rough sizes now. I'm adding in more details, such as what each of those joints are. I've also talked about the top to be made of solid timber. Just going forward and kind of extracting more thought into what you're trying to produce. Now I've got here a different one, a three-legged high kind of vase holding kind of carcass. So I put a small rounded table, as you can see here. So this is a three-legged stool or small table, high, it's 600 mils high, but very narrow. So it kind of constricts the material usage there by going really narrow to tall. Could turn the legs to a certain shape, so I could come up with a profile that I wanted to turn those legs to, possibly. And then I've only got six, as I said here, six mortise and tenon joints effectively, though they'd be more like dowel joints because it's round stock. So again, a different kind of look at it, and this time going really in depth from the thumbnail sketch, which was the ideation ideas, to the more detailed, what are my favourite two designs that I'd like to produce. So once you've done that, hopefully you've now got a really good idea of what you want to actually produce. And so here we've got an example of a finished drawing. And so the finished drawing, like the name's implied, should have all of the finished information on it ready for you to produce it. You'll notice something with these drawings. None of them are done perfectly to scale. None of them have been done with a ruler. And that's because I wanted to illuminate the fact that anybody can actually do drawings. The aim of a drawing is to be able to explain what you want to produce. In the same way that English is the language we use to communicate, your drawing is your way of communicating what you want to make. And so as long as it has enough information on it to communicate clearly what you want to produce, with the details for anyone to be able to pick it up and make it themselves, then it's done its job. So we've got here effectively a front view with a wider than high table. We've got a side view now looking from the side. Looking at it, it looks quite narrow here. So I've gone for a rectangular shape. Got a top view here. In this case, it's actually a bottom view, and you can see how I've aligned them for clear identification. And you can see here the four legs, the four rails, and the top. And you can see all the dimensions. I wanted 30 millimeters overhang for the tabletop to the edge of the table legs. And then I wanted you could tell my rails are in the middle here, so the numbers there can be calculated out after. The thing to remember with your finished drawings is you haven't necessarily gone and put this against what the material is, and that's done in the next video. So this is somewhat preliminary, because you're going to go back and look at your bill of materials here, and you're going to have to actually decide whether or not that is actually able to be produced. Is it easy enough to get a 19 millimeter thickness pine that's at least 65 wide cut to these lengths? If we could get 70 at 20, perfect. We could just mill that down and we'll be done. What about though if we can only get 18 millimeter thickness pine? We'd have to adjust our drawings, so there's a bit of play that needs to go on between these finished drawings to actually your final cut material list. So that's why we've got our drawing bill of materials, and then we'll have our cutting bill of materials, and then we'll have our costing bill of materials effectively. So 3 separate lists, and they all have very important uses. So all the details here, the dimensions of the individual planks making up the tabletop, all the pieces of material I need here in wood to make it. The only thing that is missing from this is the fact that I needed to add on length to my rails due to the fact that these are mortises. So if these are mortises and tenons, you've got to remember that that means that within your leg, and excuse the poor drawing here, I'm doing this while standing up quite far away, you would have had a mortise sticking in, a tenon sticking into the mortise here on the leg. What that dimension is up to you. Go back to your technical booklet which explained those specifications. Okay, add that distance on to your length. Do you have 2 tenons? Oh, whoopsie, you probably do. Therefore, you may have to times it by 2 before you add it on to your length. This kind of clarification and double checking is critical. When we go through this, you need to be able to explain to me exactly how everything fits together and why you've chosen the lengths you have. And if you can't show that you've adequately adjusted things for that, then we're not going to be able to go ahead with your project. Just spend some time on it, do some good drawings, make sure you've made everything as clear as possible. And that's it. There's your guide to the technical drawings required for your folio and for you to be able to produce a piece of work. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next video.